On September 29, 2006, a GOL Airlines Boeing 737 collided midair with a private jet. The impact caused catastrophic structural failure, leading to the in-flight breakup of the 737. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled descending spin, and extreme inertial and aerodynamic loads rapidly exceeded its structural limits, leading to a massive in-flight structural breakup. The remaining wreckage struck the ground at high speed, killing all 154 passengers and crew on board. To fully understand how this accident unfolded, we conducted a detailed technical analysis to reconstruct the sequence of events and closely examine the dynamics of the crash. At the end of September 2006, Brazilian airspace was experiencing enormous pressure. Air traffic was increasing faster than the system could handle, especially over the Amazon, a region where communications were difficult and radar coverage had significant limitations. GOL Flight 1907 had departed Manaus at 1835, bound for Brasilia, with 154 people on board. The aircraft was a nearly new Boeing 737-800, with only 234 flight hours. Its crew was experienced, and the flight was proceeding normally. Meanwhile, the Embraer Legacy 600 was a state-of-the-art business jet with seating for 16 and only 19 flight hours. It had taken off from São José dos Campos, with 2 pilots and 5 passengers, performing a delivery flight to the United States, with an initial stop planned in Manaus. Both aircraft were on Airway UZ6, which requires even flight levels for that route. However, the Legacy was at 37,000 feet, the same altitude as the GOL 737, so the 2 aircraft were flying at the same level on opposite courses. The critical sequence began at 1902, when the Legacy's transponder stopped transmitting. From that point, the jet disappeared from secondary radar, and its collision avoidance system became inoperative. The Legacy crew did not notice the transponder failure. They were occupied with calculations and secondary operational tasks and failed to detect that they had been without effective communication with air traffic control for over half an hour. At the same time at Brasilia Air Traffic Control, controllers assumed that the Legacy had descended to flight level 360, although they had no confirmation by radio or radar. The result was that the Boeing 737 and the Embraer Legacy continued on a collision course along the same airway at the same altitude, without anyone realizing the imminent conflict. Within seconds, the flight paths of both aircraft crossed in an almost head-on geometry. The tip of the Legacy's left winglet, a small vertical surface at the end of the wing designed to improve aerodynamic efficiency, sliced almost transversely through the Boeing's left wing. This impact drastically reduced lift on that side of the aircraft and disabled several primary control surfaces, most notably the left aileron, which allows the pilot to generate roll moments to control the aircraft's lateral bank angle. By suddenly losing a large portion of its left wing, the Boeing 737 was placed in a state of severe aerodynamic imbalance. An aircraft in normal flight depends on a relatively symmetrical distribution of lift between both wings to maintain stability. When that symmetry is abruptly lost, the aircraft immediately experiences an extreme rolling moment toward the damaged side. According to recorded data, the flight crew attempted to counter this instability at once by moving the flight controls, but there was simply not enough functional aerodynamic surface remaining to generate the forces required to restore equilibrium. Under these conditions, the aircraft entered an uncontrollable descending spiral, rapidly transitioning into a steep downward attitude with increasing airspeed. The physics of this type of motion involve aerodynamic forces acting along all 3 axes of aircraft movement. The loss of lift on one side and the persistence of lift on the other created a moment imbalance that induced an involuntary rotational motion of the aircraft. As the descent speed increased, the dynamic loads acting on the aircraft structure far exceeded its certified design limits. The enormous forces generated subjected the aircraft's structural joints, fuselage, and control surfaces to extreme stresses that those structures were unable to withstand. Within seconds, the 737 ceased to function as a controlled aerodynamic platform, becoming instead a freely falling body undergoing uncontrolled rotation. Multiple sections of the aircraft began to separate in midair, torn away by the tremendous aerodynamic forces acting on the airframe structure. The process culminated in a catastrophic structural collapse and total disintegration of the aircraft, causing the wreckage to impact the ground violently and resulting in the loss of all 154 passengers and crew. By contrast, the Embraer Legacy 600, although severely damaged, was able to remain airborne. The loss of its left winglet and the damage sustained by the horizontal stabilizer resulted in a significant reduction in aerodynamic efficiency, requiring unusual control inputs from the pilots, but did not critically compromise the lift necessary to maintain level flight. After declaring an emergency and receiving assistance from a cargo aircraft acting as a radio relay, the crew successfully carried out an emergency landing at a military base, executing a controlled descent in an aircraft whose controllability had been degraded but not eliminated. The accident involving GOL Flight 1907 had significant legal consequences for the pilots of the Embraer Legacy 600. Brazilian authorities prosecuted the American crew on charges of endangering the safety of an aircraft. Following the trial, the pilots were convicted and sentenced to prison in absentia, although their sentences were later reduced. Investigations ultimately concluded that the accident was caused by a combination of human error and air traffic control failures, but with a clear difference in perspective. Brazilian authorities tended to place responsibility on the pilots, while U.S. authorities primarily pointed to deficiencies within the air traffic control system. And with this, we reach the end of the video. If you enjoy this type of content, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed and left a like, as your support allows me to continue producing more analyses and reconstructions like this one. It also helps you stay up to date with all the new content we publish on the channel. Before signing off, I would also like to hear your thoughts in the comments, and to know whether you believe this tragedy could have been prevented. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be reading your comments, and I'll see you in the next video.